the changing seasons bring with us. Be with us as we go through our morning here in church and be safely back together again next week. As we be with those in special need of your presence. In this name we pray. Amen. I've talked about the offices. And I don't know, maybe you know what these are. It's just these canticles we're talking about, the Magnificat and the Benedictus and the Domitus, that were all from the Christmas story in Luke, that are unquestionably the New Testament's biggest contribution to music in the church as it's existed for 2,000 years. That they were sung in these divine offices. And it's a Roman Catholic concept of a cycle of services each day, 8 each day, plus Mass. Now, no, most people didn't go through this, but if you were in a monastery or a convent, you did. There, of course, there's a number of orders: Franciscans, Dominicans, Benedictines, Jesuits. I mean, they're in others. There's a number of them, and they all approach these things slightly differently. But the monasteries start coming together in the really early Middle Ages, and the first that really got organized well were the Benedictines. The rule of Saint Benedict, which Saint Benedict wrote down about how one lives in a monastery and what is expected of one, etc., goes all the way back to 535. And the offices were, I'm sure they existed. They existed at that point. I'm pretty sure they're in the rule of Saint Benedict. But the idea of a fixed hours of prayer goes back to Jewish practice. The Jews have certain prayers that they would say at certain times of the day. Kaddish, for example, is not only spoken by some relative of the departed at the graveside, it is also said by observant Orthodox Jews before they go to sleep at night. So the idea of a liturgy, if you will, of prayers that is cycling through a day is a Jewish concept as well. So there's actually 8 of the offices, and again, in a monastery, there would be Mass each day. And the intent of those Masses was not just to, everybody needs to have communion each day, because of course, remember in Mass, communion was offered in every Mass. But it was also, there were monasteries in various areas. And these people were kind of considered the people who were praying for the person in that area. If you needed rain, they would be praying for rain. I mean, it's just, there were busy people working outside the monastery, busy people in the monastery too. But one of their jobs was kind of to pray. And wealthy people, when they died, of course, there's the Roman Catholic vision of purgatory. And the church said you could get time out in purgatory if you did good deeds and all, but also for example, when Philip II of Spain died in 1598, in his will, he endowed 100,000 Masses in his name at the Escorial, which was the monastery that he built. That was people praying for his soul to get out of purgatory. So these Masses actually had, they often had purposes. This Mass, this is the 9,479th Mass in honor of Philip II. I mean, you can just imagine. I really doubt they announced it at the Mass, but still, these things would have been counted. Now, 100,000 Masses, that's a long Mass. That's a Mass of Masses. But anyway, so Mass would happen at some point during the day, and in various orders, I'm sure it happened at different times. But the names of some of these have come into Protestant practice. If we have an evening service, we call it Vespers. If we have a morning service, the Anglicans still sometimes call morning prayer Matins. So early in the morning, between midnight and 3 a.m., they would get you up and you would pray and chant. Lauds would come at daybreak, and then the next, and of course, obviously there's problems too with time, because daybreak could be before or after 6 a.m. But anyway, this is theoretically when these things take place. And remember, of course, this was first written down before there were clocks. So Lauds would be daybreak. Prime, first hour of the day, 6 a.m. I mean, this is biblical. Third hour of the day, terts, 9 a.m. Sixth hour of the day, sext, noon. Ninth hour of the day, 3 p.m. then Vespers in the evening around twilight, and then Compline before retiring. Compline meaning in Latin, complete, the day is to be completed. Some of these were musically very important, some of them were not. You know, your Magnificat tended to be done according to which monastery you were at and everything during one of these particular times. And we'll keep talking about that. But anyway, I thought it was worth just mentioning that and what these things really are. And I lived in a monastery once I was in one, it was about 3 nights. It's the monastery at Montserrat, which is on this incredibly picturesque mountain outside of Barcelona. I was there to do some research in their archive on a particular kind of music. I was looking at music manuscripts, and the monk who was in charge of the monastery's archive was there to get things out for me, and then he'd be there for a while, and then he'd go off for one of the services, and then he would come back, and then he would go off again for one of the services. I mean, this was the cycle of their day. This is what they do. So we were talking about the Magnificat. I want to go through a few more musical examples of the Magnificat and then get briefly to the other canticles and how they're used. We've already seen we haven't seen this. Magnificat texts were set to polyphony. That is, they weren't, chant is monophonic, one voice. When our choir sings, we're often singing in 4 parts. So when we say polyphony, poly, many, phony, voice. So many lines is what we mean by polyphony. And polyphony is the style of music. It emerges, as far as we know, around the beginning of the end of the 9th, beginning of the 10th century. It was probably before that, before the documentation we have. And this is what composers wrote in. They had more than one line of music. And one of the really fine composers in the Renaissance is Tomás Luis de Victoria. He's a Spanish composer from Avila. He spent a good part of his career in Rome, writing at the major churches in Rome. And he wrote a lot of Magnificats. I mean, some of these composers wrote dozens of Magnificats. The thing was being used, the text was being used all the time. And when they say primi toni, it means in the first mode. So I told you there were basically eight scales that were used in music in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, and this is the first one. And I can't explain that in less than 20 minutes, so you just have to accept the fact that it's a mode. But anyway, so I mean, the piece sounds like this. It's a bunch of short little compositions strung together to give you the Magnificat. Of course, it's in Latin. As you can hear, we have various entries by voices within different ranges. So that's the end of the first little composition. Now we go on to the next one. We've got these little 40-second, 60-second snippets. And of course, this is the picture of the Annunciation. It's obviously it's the song of Mary. Next little section. This is Clea Respexi, who has paid attention to this humble handmaid. These compositions can be, they're for anywhere between 4 and 12 parts. It's a very, very highly developed musical style that they've been thinking about for a very long time. Okay, we get to the 16th century. Henry VIII wants a new wife. Catherine of Aragon has not brought him the male child that he wants, and he thinks it's her fault, and he's also fallen in love with someone else, so he divorces Catherine of Aragon, but of course to do that, he leaves the Roman Catholic Church, which turns Henry into one of the great reformers, but believe me, it had nothing to do with really wanting to change the church. There were reformers in England who wanted to go a whole lot farther than Henry did. Anyway, so the Anglican Church is born, and it comes out, of course, very much the Roman Catholic Church. The Magnificat is a major text in the Roman Catholic Church, and it remains one in the Anglican Church. The Anglicans do translate it into English, of course, and they've been singing it in English in evensong for centuries. And I've already told you, Joy and I were at Chichester Cathedral for a week in August, and each evening, each late afternoon at 5 o'clock, there is an evensong. And in that evensong, they always sing the Magnificat, and they always sing the Nunc Dimittis. If you're Anglican and you're in the choral tradition, you call it the Mag and the Nunc. Nobody bothers to say Magnificat and Nunc Dimittis. Whose Mag and Nunc are we doing today? And composers, Anglican composers, have been setting these two texts as a set for a long time. And they'll actually have music that you'll hear in one, and you'll hear some of that same music in the other, because they're thinking about it as a unit. They're not sung at the same moment in the service, they're separated. But the Mag and the Nunc is a text that every Anglican, if they don't know it, they aren't paying attention. Anyway, this isn't the choir Joy was singing in, this is the Chichester Cathedral Choir singing the Magnificat in the choir that we were sitting in for all of these services. Oh, by the way, the Chichester Cathedral celebrated their 950th anniversary this year. They were founded in 1075. Anyway, so, this is a very typical setting of it. Everybody has their own light. This isn't the loudest video. God, rejoice in God, my Savior. It's about 3.5 minutes long. I sat in that chair. I'm sorry it's so soft. As you can see, we've got all the boys out front. They're the sopranos. They're getting younger and younger. These voices are changing faster and faster. That's hard to hear, my apologies. The problem with YouTube is the volume is different in virtually every video. That's the maximum. Right. Oh, I didn't put on the microphone.
It's okay, we can hear it.
You can hear it? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
okay.
That's fine.
So, anyway, that is enacted throughout the Anglican world every afternoon at a cathedral, of course. Cathedrals, they have all of these services. Obviously, the Anglican Church downtown, the Episcopalian Church downtown doesn't have evensong every day. Caitlin, my daughter, sings in the choir at the First Episcopal Church of Marblehead, Massachusetts, and they do one evensong a month. But they still do it
on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, on a Sunday afternoon. This one was actually written by Henry Purcell, who was a really famous English composer, 1659 to 1695. He spent a good part of his career until it was disbanded in what was called the Chapel Royal. That is the musicians who would do the services for the crown. And because he was in that ensemble, he wrote all kinds of Anglican church music, which means he wrote a lot of mags and nunks. He wrote a lot of other things too. Anyway, so, you know, the text continues to be set, continued to be set. Percival, of course, is in the 17th century. Many composers set the text. There was, for example, a famous Italian composer named Claudio Monteverdi, who spent his career in Mantua and Venice, who wrote a setting of Vespers text. And since this is done at Vespers in the Roman Catholic Church, he set that in that collection, and he set it a number of other times. Probably one of the most famous of the Magnificat settings, at least from the Baroque, is by Johann Sebastian Bach. Of course, Bach was not Catholic, he was Lutheran. And the Lutherans would use the Magnificat text a little differently. They would sing it in German in most of their services. In Bach's day in Leipzig, the high service of God, the Hauptgottesdienst, was 4 hours long by law. Remember, this is a Lutheran city. The town council is not only in charge of keeping the streets clean, they're also in charge of what's going on in religiously. So the law said that you went to church for 4 hours, and they would sing the Magnificat in German, except on high feast days. The high feast days would be Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, plus, interestingly, 3 Marian feasts that we don't even think about in the Presbyterian Church. But the Orthodox Lutherans were still thinking about it in the 18th century. So you have Visitation, Annunciation, and Purification, which are 3 of the old Roman Catholic Marian feasts. On those days, they would sing the Magnificat in Latin. And they might set it to absolutely ridiculously elaborate music, like Bach did in this Magnificat, with full orchestra, including 3 trumpets and timpani. This simple little text becomes this huge composition. It's about 25 minutes, I think, 23. 29. So instead of just single chant, we've got a whole orchestra chorus and solos. 3 trumpets. With long introduction. Very ornamental, rich writing in the voices. Again, this is for a big feast day. Not only a big choral piece, there are also major solo segments in it. This one is Quia Respexit. Again, this is where Mary is saying, God has looked favorably on me, his lowly handmaid. And this is just for soloist, with oboe and accompanying bass. Nice thing about this is it's a trio. You can't imagine the number of times the Lairds have done this. We just substitute a flute for the oboe. Why not?
All the instruments are period instruments.
But
All the instruments are period instruments.
yes, in this performance. This is a Netherlands group that is in the process of putting on YouTube all of Bach's works.
That's a long time.
And when he taught them, you humble, your humble servant. Just a gorgeous section. Bach actually has an interesting sense of humor in this piece. I'm not going to find it for you, but remember, the text in the Magnificat ends with the lesser doxology. And the lesser doxology, part of it is, as it was in the beginning, is now and ever shall be. When they start singing the text as it was in the beginning, he goes right back to the beginning of the piece.
No.
The opening music returns, as it was in the beginning.
Literally.
So anyway, that's some aspects of the history of the Magnificat. Are there any questions about that before I go on? Okay, well, the Benedictus, this is the song of Zechariah. Probably ought to just go back and remind you of the text of it, at least part of it. So it starts with, praise be the Lord, praise be to the Lord, God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. Raise the horn of salvation, house of David, deliver us from our enemies. So we have this recognition of God's role in Jewish Hebrew history, and to show mercy on our ancestors, blah blah blah, Father Abraham, and you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High. The remainder of it is about John, whose presence was prophesied, and of course becomes we all know who John the Baptist is. The usage of this in Roman Catholic practice, it was sung in the office of lauds. And lauds, of course, just means praise. But this was sung at daybreak. Every day. Every day. So this is a text that, a monk would have just had running through their head all the time. You wouldn't have a chance to think of a whole lot of other thoughts if you're doing all this stuff. Anyway. So it was sung in lauds, and as of course, that's early in the morning. And as we come into Anglican practice, it's part of morning prayer. And Joy and I also have been to morning prayer services in the Anglican Church a number of times, because we've been to Madrid several times for my research. And when we were there in 1985, our church was the British Embassy Church of St. George, which was this small, and believe me, it wasn't easy to find Protestant churches in Madrid in 1985. So this was actually very close to where we lived. And sometimes, we'd go on Sunday morning for whatever the service was. And it was often a Eucharist service, but it could also be morning prayer. And it was morning prayer. They would say, we will now sing the Benedictus, which we would sing in English. So, we know it's there. We've done it a number of times. Now, here we're kind of going, we kind of went a little bit through music history with the Magnificat, because we talked about it in chant, and then in polyphony, and then we have this elaborate polyphony of Bach, and we have later stuff that, the text is still being set by Anglican composers. There's much newer settings than the ones I've been showing you. But the Benedictus, of course, was sung in Gregorian chant. And in the same way, we see the Magnificat and Psalms, which again, they can be very long texts. It's not efficient to write a separate melody for it that you sing every day. So a lot of chant is actually done in formulae, where you have kind of a beginning little line and an ending little line, and then a recitation tone. And what's good about this is the lines are of varying lengths, and you can make the recitation tone last as long as you want. So the idea is you sing a little melody, and then you get to the recitation tone, and you sing as long as you have to get through everything else, and then you get a little thing at the end. And that is how the Benedictus works. You've got this two-part formula for each half, just like the Magnificat, and just like the Psalms. Because remember, Psalms are also two-part text, always are. There's an A and a B line. The Lord is my shepherd. Semicolon. I shall not want. I mean, every Psalm verse is like that. One or two that aren't. But it developed this way for a reason. And again, with the Psalms, the lines are this long and they're this long. So you need a recitation tone to take care of all that. Otherwise, you have to learn a lot more melody. And remember, for a long time, the melodies weren't written down. And it's hard to memorize all that stuff for an entire year of services. Anyway, whether you read music or not, this kind of makes sense, because here's all 12 verses of the Benedictus goes down to number 12, and then 13 and 14, just like the Magnificat, ends with the lesser doxology. Gloria Patri et Filio, it's glory to God and the Son and the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and never shall be, world without end. Amen. That's also sung at the end of every psalm. Remember, as I told you, in the Benedictine order, they sing all 150 psalms through the 8 offices during the week. So this is the lesser doxology is not of lesser importance, I assure you. It's sung all the time. So the way this works is the whole melody's here, and the text just keeps changing. So you hear the recitation tone. You always get the same ending. You just have to know when to go to it. You can hear this is an actual service because there's people coughing. Now, of course, if you do that every day, it's going to get a little boring, or at least predictable. Well, the history of the liturgy is a history of people who have to do this all the time, finding ways to make it more interesting. And polyphony is one of the ways you do that. So we have composers like Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina. Palestrina is the most famous composer of the Renaissance. The reason is he worked in Rome when the Counter-Reformation was going on. Reformation gets started in the first half of the 16th century. Obviously, the Roman Catholic Church is losing members all over the place. So they launched their own movement to try, and the Jesuits, a good part of it, they launched their own movement to try to take back some of that. And of course, this also brings on all the wars. But anyway, in Counter-Reformation Rome, they're kind of resetting things up. There's this thing called the Council of Trent, which starts in 1545 and ends in 1563. You heard me right. It lasted off and on 18 years as a bunch of Roman Catholic cardinals and bishops were debating in Trent what could be done to reform the Roman Catholic Church. Well, anyway, while that's going on, there's a ridiculously prolific composer in Rome who was working in some of the major churches. His name is Giovanni Pierluigi. He's from Palestrina, but we call him by the name of his town, which was a little town outside of Rome, which of course is one of the Sabine Hills, and it's now part of Rome. But anyway, he was working. He worked at the Sistine Chapel. He worked at St. Peter's, the big basilica in Rome, and he also worked at St. Mary the Major, Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome. I mean, these are three of the most important positions at various times in his life. And almost all of his music is printed. We've lost very little of his music. I meant to look up how many Magnificats the guy wrote in his life, and I forgot to, but I guarantee you there are dozens. There's 100 settings of the ordinary and the mass. There's like 500 motets. And the style of music he was writing in, the Roman Catholic Church kind of said, this is it. This is what we should do. And for a few hundred years thereafter, it remains very, very influential. They start calling it the stile antico, meaning the old style, the old respected style, the rules of which were based on Palestrina. If you go to music school today, you might study something called modal counterpoint, which is how to write this kind of music. And every model you look at is by Palestrina. Because the guy's music, he actually wrote music according to very strict rules. If you have a leap up in one direction of more than like a fourth, you will then go scale-wise downward. Every voice will fit within an octave or a tenth. Dissonance is just strictly controlled in terms of when it happens and how it gets resolved. Anyway, so Palestrina wrote settings also of the Benedictus. But it's an alternation again. You have chanted segments, and then you have polyphonic segments. This obviously makes it more exciting because you're not just singing chant. This is actually Palestrina's 500th birthday this year. So there have been conferences around the world. He doesn't really need to be studied anymore. There's plenty we know. We know everything we're going to know about Palestrina. For example, one pope loved him so much, that pope was actually from Palestrina too. He appointed him director of music at the Sistine Chapel. The next pope came along, excuse me, a married man cannot be director of the music at the Sistine Chapel. So he lost that job and went somewhere else. And his second wife was a widow of a furrier, and that made him very wealthy. Anyway, we start off with a chant at the beginning of the text. Recitation tone. And then polyphony. Now you're going to get 5 parts. With very similar style to Victoria piece. Again, a little snippet to set the line. 5 parts, soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, bass. Go back to chant for the beginning of the next line. Obviously, it takes longer to get through the Benedictus this way. Another polyphonic setting, and we'll go back to chant.
Did Palestrina put any dynamic markings in his
No,
writing?
there's nothing. Dynamic markings are very, very rare in the Renaissance. Giovanni Gabbiadini is kind of the first to do it much. He's doing it in the 1570s and 80s. During the Baroque, you start seeing more dynamic markings. It's not that they wouldn't change dynamics, it was just part of the performance practice that you decided as you came into performance. But I'm sure directors would say this one's going to be softer, it's appropriate for the text, but it's not in the menu, it's not in the prints. I don't know, I've never seen a dynamic marking in Palestrina. If there is one, an editor added it. Okay, now, the Benedictus we're going to hear out of the Anglican tradition for morning prayer is Anglican chant, which is not the same thing as what we often call Gregorian chant or plain chant, which is the ancient musical tradition of the Roman Catholic Church. Anglican chant started to develop in the 16th century, and I don't know a lot about its history, but from the sound of it, it probably froze in the late 18th or early 19th century. It's not monophonic. It's not a single line. It's a choir singing chords, so you'll just kind of have a choir doing something along the lines, just singing chords as they're going along. And the director is kind of just leading them through it. It's metric, but it's more according to the text than according to writing. And most of, well, anyway, you'll hear what it sounds like. It was probably, but wasn't that the most interesting aspect of you trying to get through becoming an Anglican singer all of a sudden? Caitlin said, of course Caitlin sings it all the time now. She says, yeah, I've come to figure out Anglican chant. I don't like it much, but you have to be able to do it. And I mean, often you're handed this music at the service. You have to sing this. I mean, it's often sight reading. Now, for a good singer, it's easy sight reading, but still, if you don't get a chance to run it beforehand, anyway, it sounds like this. This is what a Benedictus might sound like in an Anglican church. It's in English. But you can hear them singing different parts. It's in chorus. But it still has a recitation sort of chord that will sit on for it. Are set to a formula. You're listening closely, every line has a similarity to it. So once you get one down, but see again, the lines are of different lengths. So you're going to hold that recitation chord for a while, and then what they do in the music is they'll like put italics in, and this is when you go on to the next note. It's not all written out in a way that we.
Little, you'll put a little accent someplace, or there's little marks they give you. But the question is, when do you put, when you're on an ending or a beginning, where do you put single syllables on single notes, or when do you put the whole word on a note, and we had to go through that a million times. But you can't practice it without the whole group and the conductor there. And yes, I can read the psalm, and yes, I can sing the notes, but anyway.
But it's not in a normal meter, it's not 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's again, it's more tied to the text. So the director is kind of, it's not, they're not going like this, they're kind of, giving you where you change things and everything. And every director does it slightly differently. I think it would drive me insane. But, Anglicans apparently love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the Nunc Dimittis. We got just a little bit of time left, but I mean, we've kind of, this is a very similar story, if you will. So the Nunc Dimittis, again, this is the song of Simeon. Simeon is the one who, when Jesus is being dedicated in the temple, Simeon has been waiting there for years to wait to see the Messiah. He was told by God he'll see the Messiah before he dies. He sees Jesus, and he says this text. I hope he sang it, actually. He says this text about now, what this means is now depart. translate the whole line, is now let your servant depart in peace. So Roman Catholic practice, sung in compline, which of course makes sense. You sing it at the end of the day. Let your servant depart in peace. I'm going to bed after this because of course I'm getting up at 1 in the morning for lauds, for matins. And then there'll be a morning mass in there someplace before lauds. I don't know. I couldn't keep that schedule forever, but anyway. So in the Gregorian chant version, it's still set to formulae. It looks a little different in the way they write it out. It's not line and then all the music written below it. But as I said, Roman Catholic practice. This is sung in compline, and this is the first line. Second line is the same melody. Third line's a different melody. Fourth line's back to the first two. So again, they just take a couple of lines of chant and they use those. This is a much shorter text. This entire chant's a minute and a half. And in the then you know there are polyphonic versions of this as well. I have one by Palestrina. I'm not sure we have time for all of that. But Palestrina also set the Nunc Dimittis because of course there were compline services going on in monasteries and in Roman Catholic cathedrals all over the Roman Catholic world. So they would sing this on. And they wouldn't do polyphony every day. The polyphonic setting, it's for 8 voices. It's a whole lot longer than the chant setting. So that would be done on really big feast days. It wouldn't be done just all the time. And then at Evensong, as I've already told you, we were talking about Magnificat. At Evensong, you have the Mag and you have the Nunc. So later, they sing the Magnificat. There's a few other moments in the service, and then they sing the Nunc Dimittis. And actually, in that video, I already had you looking at in Chichester Cathedral. They start the Nunc Dimittis at about 3 minutes and 50 seconds. The new setting. This is also by Purcell. Purcell set the Magnificat for this service they used, and they used his Nunc Dimittis as well. Anyway, so that's Anglican church music written in the 1680s, approximately. Anyway, so that's what these canticles are and how they're used. And are there any questions?
For the composer, then they have many revisions, or do they have to get a lot of maybe permission from the Pope or some other Anglican, or what?
Not to set these texts. You would just feel moved. Oh, I'm going to set a new Magnificat and Nunc Dimittis. And earlier on, it would have been distributed by manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some cathedral guy would say, "Oh, Purcell wrote a new set of these. Maybe that's at Salisbury," and they say to the guy in Chichester, "Oh, you might like these. Why don't you look at these?" And then eventually it would get published. This would get published, of course. There would be revisions afterwards. They would just write another one. As I said, Purcell wrote a number of these sets in various keys. These are in B flat. We're not going by modes. We're going by keys at this point. But he would write a set of Anglican church music in B flat. It would include the Magnificat and the Nunc Dimittis, and there's other texts too, the Te Deum and stuff. But that's not actually out of the New Testament. Which is
Thank
what
you,
I
Paul.
think
It's marvelous research.
Anything else? Well, I missed the choir rehearsal on Wednesday night, so I need to go learn the anthem.
Yeah.